The Chosen is a series that has come out over the last few years to an amazing response from the church. The show creates mostly fictional backstories for characters that we meet throughout the Gospels. While normally I wouldn't be interested in a show with that type of premise, I had a slew of people telling me that I absolutely have to watch it. So I watched the first 2 episodes, and being who I am, an absolute fanboy of the cultural and historical aspects of the Bible, I had to go point out the errors I saw made during these first 2 episodes. Now that is not to take away from the absolutely amazing impact that this series has had, and the good that it's done for people in church, out of church, coming to church. Absolutely incredible, and I love the impact that this series is having. This show is a historical fantasy, and that's just fine, but for those who are interested in where that line gets a little blurred, I'm gonna clear it up right now. The first thing that caught my eye was the exorcism scene when Nicodemus comes to cast the demons out of Mary Magdalene. The way that Nicodemus handles this exorcism is pure fantasy. This looks like something straight out of a horror movie. This thing here is called a thurible.
Thurible.
Huh. What this is a censer on chains. Now a censer is a dish that you burn incense in, and that is something that the Jewish people would use. But nobody really hung it on chains until the Catholics and Orthodox came out with that 300 or 400 years later. So if you had a Jewish Pharisee trying to deal with demons, he would never ever have used a thurible. Did I say that right? Now in this kind of situation where there's somebody who's possessed by a demon, the Jewish people had 3 psalms that they would use and read to the people who were struggling with demon possession. These were Psalms 10, 91, and 127, the most common of which was Psalm 91. Imagine if we had Nicodemus come into this room and read Psalm 91 to Mary Magdalene. Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. This I declare about the Lord. He alone is my refuge, my place of safety. He is my God, and I trust him. For he will rescue you from every trap and protect you from deadly disease. Later in the chapter it says, for he will order his angels to protect you wherever you go. They will hold you up with their hands, so you won't even hurt your foot on a stone. As it turns out, we do see this passage quoted in the New Testament, and the person who says it is Satan himself. In Matthew 4, Jesus goes into the wilderness to fast and pray and be tempted by Satan. And for the second temptation, Satan takes Jesus to the highest point in the temple in Jerusalem and says to him, if you are the Son of God, jump off, for the scriptures say, he will order his angels to protect you, and they will hold you up with their hands, so you won't even hurt a foot on a stone. It's crazy to me that the passage that the Jewish people use against demons is the passage that Satan uses to try to tempt Jesus. And I think that would have a huge impact seeing that in this series. Seeing Nicodemus try to use a passage against a demon and then later on having Satan use the same passage against Jesus. The next thing that caught my eye is seeing Jewish men wearing yarmulkes in the 1st century. While Jewish men might have covered their heads with some sort of a wrap to protect themselves from the elements, at this time they had no religious precedent for covering their heads. In the modern day, most Jewish men do wear yarmulkes on the Sabbath at the very least, but that tradition wasn't started until the 1700s. The Apostle Paul actually commands men to worship and pray with their heads uncovered. Now this third thing caught my eye throughout the entirety of the first 2 episodes, and that's that we are using frayed clothing all over the place. We're seeing it used to portray that people are poor. And this is just a cheap thing that we do in movies all the time. If we want to show that somebody's poor, we have this unhemmed edge to their clothing. If a character is rich, they have hems, and if they are poor, they can't afford hemmed clothing. Historically speaking, this is really goofy. Everybody had hemmed clothing in the 1st century. Even Jesus, the poorest of the poor, had hemmed clothing. We know the story of the woman that touches his hem. Now the word used here to talk about the hem of Jesus' robe refers to tassels, but those tassels cannot be attached to clothing without a hem. So even the poorest people in the 1st century were not having unhemmed clothes. Their clothes weren't just unraveling at the edges. Now here's one that I see in every piece of media portraying the 1st century Romans is these face guards just swinging about, kind of bashing them in the face. These face guards had little leather straps that hung down and they'd be tied underneath the chin. So those face guards would be pressed against your face and they'd actually protect you from from whatever was coming in. The idea that these were supposed to just kind of fly around and somewhat protect you is really silly. Of course, the leather straps would rot off, so if you saw a helmet in a museum or something like that, you would often see it without these leather straps. Now, who's to say that the soldiers would actually tie the straps if they were in battle? That probably gets a little warm, so it makes sense that they would wear them open like this, but to have the leather straps missing altogether is a little funny to me, and I wish that detail were there. And for number 5, I'm getting really technical. Mary Magdalene's supposed to be in Capernaum, and when we shoot this dramatic scene, she's looking off a cliff at water, which is not anywhere in Galilee. I've been to the Sea of Galilee and there's absolutely zero cliffs whatsoever. So I'm just gonna pretend that this great dramatic scene just happened in her head and not actually like it was supposed to be happening in the Sea of Galilee. So there's my nitpick fanboy critique, which doesn't have anything to do with the effectiveness of the impact of this series, which I absolutely love seeing. Let me know what you think of The Chosen in the comments below. If you haven't watched it, go watch it, like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.